we really have a big part of the portfolio that is really tailored to the local needs.
And Andreas, what has kind of your experience been, I think, looking at how brands translate within supermarkets? I think we have seen in Southern Africa the kind of, I guess, this cookie cutter model where some brands have been wanting to expand to the market, the massive market that is offered to them in Africa, and it's not really worked. Is that because it's to do with unrecognizable brands? Is it to do with the fact that they're not targeting the local market correctly? I'm just wondering what your experience has been and what you've seen.
No, absolutely. And maybe just to build on also what Christian said, I think it's worth remembering when customers come to the supermarket shelf, they are looking to fulfill a need state. So they're not sitting there saying, I want a local brand, I want an international brand. They're looking to fulfill a particular need state. And in our experience, what drives that decision is around price, but it's also around product efficacy. The price is important, but will the product deliver within, I guess, the economic constraint that I have to bring food on the table for my family? So those will be the main purchase criteria. I think if we think about brands, though, there are three things that we think about. One is macro factors, and I'll come back to that because that's been important, certainly in the COVID and post-COVID era. One would be category-specific factors. There are some categories where branding is a lot more important than others. There's a lot more emotional engagement. My colleagues' categories here would definitely be some of them baby food, for example, whereas in others, branding is not so important. And then there are some regional and local specific factors that drive brand preference. And you sort of need to look at all of those, right? So from a macro perspective, what have we seen? Well, because of COVID and inflation, we've seen customers trading down. So pricing has become a lot more important within certain categories. But what you also see across Africa is very specific regional preferences. For example, Kenyan customers are much more comfortable buying local products. When our survey partners ask that question, whereas if you look at other markets like Egypt, that isn't the case. So there are trust factors that impact it that have regional variations that one needs to take into account. Beauty would be a good one, right? Kenyan customers are very trusting of local beauty brands. Nigerian customers aren't. So I think those are the things that I would bring out. But I think where if I look at the sort of macro trend that we are seeing and that we're seeing in research across Africa is local brands have tended to do better. And in our experience, that's around price. But I think that's also around tailoring their products to domestic needs, which sometimes bigger international players struggle with. Typically, local players can be more agile. That isn't always the case, but often we found them to be more agile. And often they have distribution, which is a point I'll come back to later in the case of us being a supermarket, that helps them defend their turf against international brands.
Yeah, thank you. Henrik, looks like you're keen to add something here. Is that right?
Yes. I just want to pick up the whole thing around price, right?
Yeah.
And giving what we have been through in the past years, and I think we talked about COVID, and we have all seen a lot of inflations. We have seen a lot of logistical issues. So I think an important, a key component of bringing down the price, which I think is a common theme here, right?
Yeah.
Is to look at the supply chain and really localize the supply chain as much as possible. And I think a key part of that is also bringing down the cost of financing. And we have done a lot of work in the supply chains to bring down financing, in particular, I guess in a simplistic way, ensure that the working capital requirement goes down in the supply chain, and the high cost of capital is very much an issue. And it's structures around where you kind of, as a financier, you take the risk of the buyer, but benefits the suppliers. And that has helped a lot. It can either be, we have done some directly, but also through financial intermediaries. So really with financing, I think that's also a key component in all this. So
yeah, of course. Brilliant. I did want to go to Johannes next and ask, because just before the panel, Johannes mentioned that they were opening, they were launching a beauty products company in East Africa. So I'd be really interested to know kind of, the thinking behind that, some of the difficulties you might have come into in the development process. And then maybe some of our panelists could even offer you some advice. Some of these guys have done it. They're building strong brands already. Like maybe you have some advice to give to Johannes. But please, could you give us a bit of information about this?
Thank you. So as I said, my work for the past 25 years in Africa has been mainly in the building and hardware sector.
Yeah.
The past 2 years, I launched a cosmetic brand in Ethiopia called Tilla. And I basically identified a need for a local brand there, which I intend to turn Pan-African. You know, I'm based in Ivory Coast, and in Ivory Coast you have probably 50 producers of local brands, and you have big brands like Unilever and principally Unilever, and PZ Cuisine was there but closed down. And what I identified, you know, almost 20 years ago is that the bigger brands, some of my colleagues on the table may not like this, but the bigger brands with time are being phased out.
Yeah.
And that has to do with the fact that you have more educated Africans who go to school and learn how to produce these things. So, you know, 20 years ago, someone was willing to pay $3 for a toothpaste. And today, you know, in Kenya or in Ivory Coast, you have 50 people producing 50 cents toothpaste.
Okay.
Right? Mm. So, again, I'm not an expert in FMCG, but I identified that demand.
You will be.
And I have to throw this in there. So the reason also, my principal reason for going into cosmetics in Ethiopia is actually because of the skin bleaching problem that there is in Africa.
Yep.
That's a bit different from this conversation, but it's something that is, you know, it's a silent killer. It's killed more people than COVID or HIV, and no one really talks about it.
No.
And our brand is based on, you know, producing skin-safe products.
Yeah.
Produced in Africa, soup and nuts, ingredients from Africa, as much ingredients as we can use from Africa and transformed in Africa, shipped to about 3 markets now, but we hope to get into many more markets.
Yeah, and kind of on the back of that, then you know, you're talking about, you saw an opportunity, you saw that it was an open market for you. Yeah. And then you're talking about how you're sourcing local products to make these items. How, I mean, is that easy? Do you need to, how does that work? What have you been doing to make sure you secure the right items?
The West Africa economic zone functions a little bit better than the East Africa.
Okay.
Because there's
controversial.
At least the French West Africa zone, because it's the same common business law, and it's similar currency, so it functions better than in East Africa. I was the goal was to work with landlocked countries out of Ethiopia, like Sudan, Uganda, and then enter Kenya and Tanzania. But what we've come to find is that it's not as easy as it's presented by the politicians and what have you. And I hope as we go forward, of course, Africa is a young nation and a young continent, and I'm sure with time these things will be rooted out. But in West Africa, we have a very, very developed economic zone in French West Africa.
Yeah, maybe Munir, then it'd be good to go back here. We'll go back to Christian and Andreas about their advice. But what has your experience been then in developing a brand that is recognised cross borders within East Africa? Could you preempt some of the issues that Johannes might run into, or is it a different play?
I think our strategies was with the founder some years ago when he decided to move out of Tanzania.
Yeah.
Okay. Because that start to have the footprint of the brand, which become a known brand, Azam brand. Then, but how protecting, that's your question, those brands?
I think, is your experience?
Yeah, we have the Maheu, like in Zimbabwe, we do Maheu from when we acquire Blue Ribbon.
Yeah.
So it was existing brand.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are going to launch new brands because we are in Mozambique. I'm going to commission a detergent plant, which is a new called brand. We do not call Azam, we call Luar, for example. So we are working how we are going to launch and how we are going to do it. We use an existing brand in Zimbabwe for instant noodles, Aroma. Andreas came from Zimbabwe, aromas so very well. So the brand we have that the core. which is Azam brand. And from that brand, we try to create babies that's going to come, and which we want to develop, because then we protect more the group than having only one name brand.
Yeah, makes sense, yeah.
Diversify and creating new product with the new brands. The challenging in Africa is to protect those brands first. Sometimes people talk about Africa, but they forgot it's a 54 countries, 54 institutions, 54 governance, 54 more than 1,000 culture way to work. So it's not a country, it's a continent with different countries. So what helped us to be around is mainly because we are taking the risk to go out Tanzania. Yeah. We are now present in Uganda, we are now present in Kenya, we are present in Rwanda, we are in Burundi, we are in Zimbabwe, we are in Mozambique, we are in South Africa, we have registered the Angola and DRC company. So from there, we are bringing that cement the brand, the core. Yeah. So then we look internally, what's the consumer, what the local wants to produce what they want.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, because I think Johannes obviously saw this gap in the market and the need for an African brand to kind of fulfill that space. But I guess, so, and we're talking about the brand recognition bit, but maybe Andreas, you can talk a little bit about what Johannes was also talking about in terms of access to market and in terms of product and manufacturing. I mean, what logistical issues are there, or have you found in terms of, you know, getting goods on your shelves? How have you had to diversify your supply chains, your distribution model, and that kind of thing?
Absolutely, and I'd like to look at it through two lenses. I think one is the sourcing of product, and the other is how do we get it to market. Let me start with the last one first, and I'll do a little bit of a plug for us, but I think it's a genuine point, which is, I think with the development of formal retail, things like that will take place faster. Yeah. It is a lot harder to launch products in an informal segment where distribution is much harder. So when you're dealing with larger supermarket chains, getting a product to market, and not just getting it to market, but getting it to market cost effectively, becomes a lot easier. And I think that's important both for the supplier and the retailer, because you can collaborate, create an environment of trust, and ultimately take cost out of the supply chain. That's much harder to do when your end customers or retailers are thousands of different points of distribution. So I'd say that on the formal retail side. So, and that's, I think, what we would like to do and continue to do. When we think about the supply chain, though, I think there are still a lot of hindrances. Maybe not Pan-African, because we don't source Pan-African, but certainly we would like to source more regionally. And that is a challenge. And I think Johannes has already addressed the point. I think facilitating that, if you just look at the East African region, for example, there is a lot we could do to bring cheaper products to the end customer, especially on basic food staples, if there was greater regional collaboration. Okay. That isn't so much on the brands. I think some brands may well work Pan-African, some may work regionally, some may only work in a small part of a country. I think those are the differences that Munir talked about across Africa. But from a product perspective, irrespective of what you put on the label, there's a lot more that we could drive by sourcing more effectively, I think in particular regionally.
Do you think now, with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, and there's a bit more momentum behind that, do you think that's going to change that for you, or?
I don't know what specifically, what steps specifically will be taken. But if we look at the countries, if you look at where Munir is based in Tanzania and where we are based in Kenya, there is a whole lot more that we could do together. In fact, we were talking about this before the panel. Yeah. And I think putting momentum behind that ultimately will benefit the end customer through pricing, which has been the biggest challenge we faced.
I think Munir wants to say something.
Yeah, you point to one thing which always make me not laugh, but have to be realistic when going for, you say I drive from Dar es Salaam to here. Okay. So just to see how the road is, how your cross-border is. And when you talk about African CFTA, is a good product on the paper. Yeah. Okay, on the paper. We have a blending challenge. We talk about procurement local crops or local raw materials to manufacture. We have a big issue. We don't have one currency. we are always going to trade in foreign currency between the countries. So how you want to develop and supply chain locally if you're not able to solve that problem about cross-border? We talk about almost the last 10 years about free movement of people. I mean, for my European passport, I can better travel in Africa than my African passport. How can you understand that?
Yeah.
Okay. So this, we are talking about the last 15 years. Okay. We talk about African passport. I was laughing that day when the head of state showed the African passport. I say, I mean, I have my French passport. I can go to Spain. I don't need to have a different European passport to do that. Okay. So I think we should stop hypocrisy and align ourselves and start to move and do. We are trying to do on our best, but we are depending also with the institution, with the will. Yeah. And the will to change is the governance, okay? And those, the government, to bring this dynamic we are trying to create as industrial, as retails, in making business better in Africa. Yeah. So we can try, we are doing, it's a peanuts compared to the size of the market today. You talk about West Africa, how it's worked, the CZ. I know West Africa. I'm not comfortable yet for that zone, but in East Africa, I can see between Uganda, between Tanzania, between Kenya, when there is something cross-border there, tomorrow we have newspaper, they block sugar, they block flour, they block this. And every day we are going to sit and say we are opening one market. Yeah. So that block also brand to grow quickly in the region.
So it's part of this story then is about the political will to break down some of the barriers to allow the free movement of not just people but goods. And
that's very important. You see, it's like a cube. Okay, we are on the bottom of the cube, and the governance is on the top of the cube. So in between we have the market. Yeah. So if these guys, they are bringing down and Bari has to go up. So we can do whatever best we want, but we won't move. So yeah, we have the challenge. You talk about supply chain, logistic. Yeah. I imagine you can lost 2 million at the port for demurrage. Yeah. Okay, that money is not even benefit the countries. Yeah. It's going to a shipping line. You pay 2 millions and millions going, so that consumer has to pay.
I think, Henrik, I think you wanted to add something then.
Just want to come in on the whole point around the distribution, right? Andrea was talking about, that the clear advantage of having a formal retail and how you can bring down prices. But I think the reality is, right, if you look at Africa, as you said, Monia, 54 countries, right, and very, very, very different. And there's all sorts of statistics out there, but I think at least some of the statistics I've gotten is like roughly 90% of fast-moving consumer goods go through traditional channels. Yeah. And how do you do that efficiently, and how do you do that in a way that your brand is protected and enhanced in many ways? And we have seen some very interesting examples around that where you make sure in the sub-distributor, or whatever the correct term is, where you make sure everybody in the value chain gains value, and thereby help protecting the brand, and then bringing in also the communities. And it can be, we have seen some very interesting examples also where there was civil unrest in the country, and actually the supply chain and the workers in the factory went in to protect the factory in order because they built these very strong links to communities.
Yeah, yeah, brilliant. Kristen, I think you wanted to add something.
Yeah, I just want to take a little bit of a different perspective. We can talk a lot about the difficulties, but I think for me what is more important is to look at the opportunities. And I think operating in Africa and succeeding in Africa needs obviously agility, it needs flexibility, and needs tailored solutions. There's not even within a market, it's like that. So it's very different if in South Africa I want to serve ShopRite, or if I want to serve thousands and thousands of Spaza stores. If I go to Morocco, the majority of the grocery sales is in small traditional trade. So we adapt. In Morocco, we serve every day 70,000 stores direct. In South Africa, we work in partnerships because distribution partnerships are much more established, and you'd use a different one for, let's say, the modern trade, how we call it, and a different one for traditional trade. In infant nutrition, we need to serve pharmacies. So I think if you want to win in Africa and succeed in Africa, you have to really, think about this agile mindset of basically how do I find the solution, starting with the product, but also starting with the right portfolio for the right channel. If we're in chilled products in dairy, I cannot sell chilled products into stores that have no fridge. It's very obvious. So or I provide them a fridge, or I need to give them products that are shelf stable. And I think all of that is about mastery of, kind of the specificities of Africa. And overcoming this is a competitive advantage, right? And that's how I see it. So it's the one that basically manages it best is going to have kind of the advantages. And serving local consumer, also the African consumer is not one consumer when it comes to food. The needs, the traditions in South Africa or in Morocco or in Ghana, they're very different, and I think that's something that we have to really also respect, and I think that's what we try to do with being really very, very local, and also having local supply chains, running local factories, collecting and buying products locally in the market. That's the only way.
I guess yeah, exactly. I think the idea that you talk about of being solutions driven, being agile, and it sounds like part of that is finding the products locally and then tailoring those to local markets. I mean, do you have to source some of your primary products offshore, for instance, to bring them in, or is that just not kind of part of that? How nimble do you have to be in regards to that?
Of course, we're a product producer, so we're not finding products, we're creating products, we're creating brands, we're looking then for raw materials. And yes, part of the raw material we import. And what we're trying to, which has worked up until COVID, has worked very well. When you look at dairy ingredients, skim milk powder was very efficient. Now things have changed quite significantly. Supply chains have been disrupted, costs have been going up through the roof. On top, you have some currency devaluations like in Nigeria, etc. So if I want to be competitive, I need to find other ways. Yeah. So we're localizing more and more. We're also reformulating or recreating products to serve at price points that are different than maybe the ones that were there at that price point. So, I cannot sell the same kind of yogurt maybe at 1 dirham in Morocco with the new inflation, but I can sell a different yogurt at 1 dirham, right? Differently developed, more local, even more local. And that's the agility that we have to have, because this 1 dirham price point or 15 naira price point or, whatever it is in Ghana City, 1.5, we have to match those. Because also one of the things we see is that in food, coinage is absolutely critical, and it's not because there's a 10% or 15% inflation. We serve a lot of products to kids. Parents don't inflate the pocket money of their kids, right? They still get 100 naira when they go to school to find themselves the snacks and lunch for the way back. So if I don't offer an opportunity, a product at this range, the kids simply will go out. They will not go back and say, Mom, the product is more expensive, you need to inflate my pocket money. That's not how it works. Yeah. So that's the flexibility and the agility. And again, mastering this with strong brands is critical. Yeah. But I also, last but not least, believe in something that you hear a lot is, I think it's true for consumers in Africa, in Southeast Asia, and India. Consumers have too little money to waste it on bad quality products. Okay. So with the little money they have, they still want to have good quality products. And that's something which is absolutely critical. They will always recognize good quality over bad quality, and I think that's also something which is fundamental for us to always keep, right? That the value proposition is right. Yeah, brilliant. Andreas, I wanted to ask, how are you seeing some of the points that Christian made about the quality, the price, availability? How is that playing out on your shelves in Nibes? Are you seeing, how are your consumers and customers changing the way they shop?
Absolutely. Look, the last few years have been a big challenge for customers. You know, we've seen inflation. I mean, the overall headline inflation numbers, I think, are well known, you know, high single digits. But if you look at core inflation in commodity products, in many cases, you're looking at 20 or 30%. And wages haven't increased by the same amount. In fact, wages haven't really gone up at all during that time period. So customers have less to spend. You know, we're seeing, I mean, what are we seeing and what are we doing about it? So what are we seeing is people are buying less volume. I think that's obvious. You know, you can put fewer items into your basket. People are buying smaller smaller pack sizes. So we've seen a real trade down from 5 litre to 3 litre to, you know, half a litre oil, and the same for rice and sugar. So that's how it's manifesting itself on the shelf. I think what we're looking to do, and I think that's where my point earlier about formal retail and formal retail scale is important, is working together with manufacturers to try and drive specific price points that the customers can afford, right? And that can only happen when you work in collaboration with your suppliers, because there's no point haggling. It's got to be a win-win situation, and that's around how can we source better together, how can we create an environment of trust so the suppliers going out buying ingredients that they know they can sell. And I think that's where having a big partner on the other side helps, and absolutely taking money out of the supply chain. And so, that's how we're looking to address it. In some cases, that will be through own label products, so Naivas branded products.
Yeah.
Or third brands that we own. And in many cases, that is collaborating with existing, A brands, or indeed smaller brands who can deliver the quality, but do it at a better price point. Yeah. And what's been interesting for us is even in categories that historically have been more brand driven. So, for example, sanitary, we've seen customers shift to locally manufactured, much more affordable products, because they've realized that the quality they're getting is still as good as what the A brand used to deliver.
Yeah. I wanted to kind of go back to Christian's point on supply chain resilience as well, and ask Johannes, actually, a little bit about, you're obviously developing this new cosmetic beauty company in East Africa, and you have a well-established West African company that's less on the fast-moving consumer goods, but will probably have the same, will feel the same impact when it comes to supply chain distribution. I mean, how have you kind of navigated the way that business works in West Africa? And, I mean, do you have any lessons for yourself when it comes to your FMCG business in East Africa? Yeah, how does that play out?
So our group started off as retailers.
Yeah.
Okay. Then we got into distribution. Then we got into manufacturing. So in fact, we had time to set up networks. Again, it's not FMCG, so sometimes I guess with FMCG you can't really support the cost of setting up your own distribution. But what we've done is we've backward integrated with producing things that work in our networks. And our networks are in 9 countries. And because of this economic zone, it works. So if you produce rebar in Senegal, you can't sell it to Gambia. If you produce machetes in Ghana, you can't send it to Nigeria. And that's I wasn't trying to downplay the economic zone in East Africa. What I was saying is, in West Africa, it's
good start clawing back there. Yeah.
But that whole notion of setting up networks is a strength, because it allows you to deploy products for much lower deployment cost. If I don't know marketing terminologies, but it also allows you to control your supply chain. Yeah. Allows you to control your distribution chain. It allows you to basically get more profit. It also allows you to develop markets in a rapidity that if you don't control your own distribution, you wouldn't be able to do. Now I know, Danone doesn't own maybe ShopRite or some of these other distribution points because it would be too costly. But in my core, field, which is hardware and steel, it's sometimes worth it to do that.
Yeah, I think that was actually something that we talked about before, Munir, about having a bit more control, right, over your own supply chain and distribution. How has your experience been with that? And do you see that developing into, building partnerships, or is it something that you want to keep control of?
When the founder of the company started, 17th, 18th, there was nothing producing in Africa. So he was obliged to go to a vertical integration.
Okay.
So in order to make sure he's controlling the cost and he control the distribution. So then we start for the packaging. So we do packaging. So we start with the transport. So we do the transport. We go to the ICD, the dry container. So in order to come out, we have shipping, when we trade with petrol, or we have shipping to move around Dar es Salaam to Zanzibar, called Sea-Link. We can load the trucks straight to Zanzibar and offload the goods, and the same coming back. So we tried to create that environment which was not yet in place by what we are seeing today. I mean, for example, Kigali, it has been advanced in terms of infrastructure and organization. We go to the neighbors, they're trying, but still it takes long to do it. So you talk about West Africa, they are more closely together and sharing the ANC. But I guess give an example of Mozambique. If I want to load a cargo to beach, lower cost, to go, let's say, from Nacala to Kilimani, I have to do export document when we are in the same country. So you see, and if I want to load from Nacala to go to Dar es Salaam, the cost is costing me more than going to China. Oh. So we have to understand all these challenges we have in Africa, that we need to come out and stop make speeches and going. We need really to sit and say, what are you putting in place to allow even the local or even the overseas product to come easily in the continent, and reducing the poverty of the people, because everything is spent on that.
I think that is a good place to get Henrik back into the conversation. I guess
it's getting more and more controversial.
Yeah. Well, I think a few of the panelists, they talk about some of the solutions to the problems that they face. They've talked about the distribution networks and the supply chains, and I think it's obviously well known, as you get to a stage in your business development, at some point you want to be able to access finance. How does the IFC kind of support this business development, that kind of and I'm thinking not obviously just in the financing angle, but in terms of creating partnerships to overcome some of these more structural issues, if at all. How does the IFC fit in here?
No, thanks, Kenneth. Let me just say, IFC is part of the World Bank Group, and I think some of the broader trade-related issues and issues related to government and how government interacts obviously falls a bit more into the purview of the World Bank itself, right? So I should be clear, but there's a clear bridge between how you approach the dialogue between the governments and the private sector, and how that plays into some of these. I guess we're really talking about trade-related issues, right? And we have capabilities also to engage in that. I think in the context of Africa, right, to think all of Africa is necessarily officially going to trade together, maybe, I don't know, maybe one we need to break it down in smaller blocks, and then I think what's also happened, right, and then do that. But I think it's a very complex issue, and I think it touched upon many of the things we talked about here. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. And Christian, I think again, when we talked about overcoming some of these problems and bottlenecks, creating networks. I mean, how important is it for, an internationally known brand like Danone to create and to partner with kind of maybe local companies or local networks and really embed yourself into that to make sure that you get that brand recognition at that level?
No, I think for us it's very important to have strong local partners, right? And, in Africa we have two categories, as I mentioned before, the dairy and specialized nutrition or infant nutrition. So in infant nutrition, it's very important that we get strong distribution partners, especially in markets that are small. We're basically setting up a, kind of a legal entity, and all this structure at the start doesn't make sense for multinationals. So you need to build partnerships. We grow and, through partnerships. We have we're very strong route to market partnerships in certain markets. So we always see market by market what is the best way? Or in East Africa, you know, we are operating through a joint venture, you know, which is Brookside. So, you know, we also have to have the right flexibility, because a market needs to have a certain size for us to be able to operate it very, very local. You know, it's difficult if you go today, you know, if I was asked yesterday, oh, can you develop the dairy category? Would you be interested to go to Rwanda and basically build the business here? You know, if the market is very small, investing in a factory where you have to invest 50 million euro, you know, if I can make 10 or 15 million euro net sales or 20 million euro net sales, it doesn't really make sense. Even if I would go to IFC and they would be giving me a very, very good condition, which I'm sure they will give, even then the case wouldn't make sense. So it's better to start the market with export, reach a certain level of size, you know, so exporting maybe through Brookside from Kenya. So, and that's where partnerships come in, you know, as markets develop. And that's what we constantly look at, is what is the maturity of a market? Is the market ready for local? Is there an upstream supply chain that you would really be able to have a benefit with producing locally? So that's absolutely critical for us. And again, we can never do it alone. So partnerships with people that know the market, the route to market, is absolutely critical.
I guess, I mean, Henrik, I think that's something that the IFC works on, right? Is helping, I guess, multinationals. You know, how important is it for you, how important is it for multinationals to create partnerships on the ground to succeed? I mean, what's your experience been there?
No, I think particularly when you enter into more challenging market, right? And it can be challenging in terms of the level of development, the regulatory environment, but also the supply chains, right? I think even the more important is to have local partners, right? And try to have a bigger or larger control over the supply chain. I think as the country develops, right, you can better enter without maybe a local partner. But I think local partners in general is, I think in the context of Africa, I think it's extremely important, right? But like everywhere else, you've got to be very careful who you pick, right? Because a local partner can do things for you, but they can also do things against you, right? As you gain a foothold. So we all have stories around that. But,
And do you think that some of these, you know, international companies, they understand that community engagement, you know, when it comes to creating brands?
I think so. I think some of these things are very much linked, right? How you create around a supply chain, a brand, a manufacturing facility, how you have a very, very, very strong engagement with the communities, and you know, we live in a world where you know, information flow, and there's so much misinformation out there. So I would be very worried if I had one of few brands, right? Somebody can run a campaign with all sorts of misinformation, right, and destroy your brand, right? So I think it's very much important to have that engagement with the community. Yes.
Okay, brilliant. I think we've got a little bit of time for some questions from the audience, in case there are any. Yeah, there's one here.
My question is on rebranding. The Middle East, like Dubai or Qatar, you are offered to register a company, and you can't fully own this company. Then you export that grain product, maize, rice, sesame, and others, to a free trade zone. Then you repackage it. You make it made in Dubai or made in Doha for you to sell to Arab market. Isn't this demarketing African brand? And the other one, the branding, we grew up with a foreign orientation. That is what is shaping our life, and then also moving to develop our own local brand. Like India in the 1970s, 80s, Indian movies was all household in Nigeria. Through that, we were able to develop the Kannywood from northern Nigeria.
So can you hold the microphone?
Okay. In northern Nigeria, for example, we grew up with Indian movies. Out of that, we are able to develop our own local movie. there's industry, Kannywood. If you look at the Kannywood branding, it's toward the Indian culture. Over time, Lagos or Nigeria and the music industry, we've come up with Burna Boy and others. This is a local branding. In South Africa, ShopRite is all over, MTN is all over. This is local branding. We are succeeding. It's still what some countries develop better if that country is identified as a tourist nation. You see their local product is patronized by people that frequently visit it, and that helped their local product to develop. Branding is all about affordability to me. You can, in some countries, regardless of what is developed, I can stick to my Gucci, I can still stick to my whatever brand I want. But if I don't have the means, I have to stick with the local brand. So population helps in driving a local brand. Thank you. So my question, number one, is a question. Others are comment and contribution.
I think I might have lost that question. Can you maybe go back?
Okay, the rebranding.
So yeah.
Africa, countries from Africa.
Yes.
Have to open companies in Middle East.
Yep.
Now export some goods, package it, and then rebrand it as made in that country, not originally producer of the product. Isn't that demarketing the value?
Is there anyone in particular that you'd like to?
I don't know.
Yeah, please, Johannes.
I'd like to say something. Maybe it may or may not answer the question, but I think you raise an interesting point about branding in general and the African brand. I think most countries at least that I operate in, don't really have a national brand.
Yep.
They don't really, I mean, Côte d'Ivoire, which is a huge exporter of agricultural produce, only recently set a law to require all products to say made in Côte d'Ivoire. And when I say recently, it's really just the last 2 years. It wasn't required. So some of what you're talking about actually should be addressed by local governments, right? And in a lot of cases, those regulations just aren't there. Another thing I wanted to say is I think that, or at least on my observation, I think the last 20 years, the African brand has, at least on the continent, has more value. But then you have situations like I was saying, I just recently set up a cosmetic personal care factory, and our products are mid to high end, right? And it is an full-blown industrial, factory. And the challenges we have in Ethiopia is people say, well, if it's Ethiopian, why does it cost so much?
Yeah.
Or I have a friend who set up an ink production, ink cartridges production in Ethiopia, who, once he was done, even the government wouldn't buy from him, So, the stigma is somehow tricky. And I think that, we have to ask local governments to require exports and countries have to work on their branding.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe just to build on that. I think consumers, buy brands and the product value propositions that come with the brand. And you see international brands that do very well in Africa. Well, if you look even outside of FMCG, and you have a lot of strong local brands. I don't think that there is a black or white or one is better than the other, kind of solution. When I look at infant nutrition, for example, the reality of the supply chain and production is that and probably the same for some pharmaceutical products, that it's today cheaper to produce in Europe and we made the studies. Sometimes I would have to increase the price by up to 40% if I want to produce it locally, because most of the ingredients are not at the quality that I need, which are pharma-like quality, not available. Okay. So I need to ship a lot of raw materials and then, build expensive packing and blending facilities. So produce everything local is not always cheaper. But, we have to make sure that for certain products, the supply chains become more local, right? And sometimes it's also a journey. It's the same when we looked at developing affordable product and we talked to some supplier to say, okay, what if we blend dairy protein with soy protein? Because there's a lot of soy in Western Africa, for example. But there's no soy protein processing capacity. So, okay, I can buy the soybeans, but then I have to ship them somewhere else to process them and bring them back. And then the saving is gone, right? The opportunity, the affordability is gone. So it will also take time to transform, kind of supply chains, to have more processing, because Africa is also used to exporting raw material at a very low processing stage. Let's put it this way. So a lot of you could say value creation is happening outside of Africa. And I think with the consumer market that we have in mind in Africa, I think we need to transform, right? And I think that's not going to happen overnight, but it needs to have a very clear, vision. And then you come back also, it needs to have transformational and transitional financing to get there.
Brilliant, thanks. Anyone else?
I'd just like to add a
small Andreas,
point to that. Again, Côte d'Ivoire, where I spend most of my time, produces almost 50% of the world chocolate. And, chocolate bars aren't produced there. Some of it has to do with costs, as you say. But then there are certain things too, like, we don't have milk, right? So, even though, there's a $150 billion market value on chocolate in the world, and half of it comes from Côte d'Ivoire, we're only getting 3 or 4 billion, And how do you move that whole value system down?
Yeah.
I mean, that's you guys. Right?
Yeah. Andreas, I think. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
I mean, very briefly, just to add and build on what both gentlemen have said, I think, first of all, local doesn't need to mean cheaper. I think we can make local premium and we can make local affordable. Chocolate would be a very good example of that. But I think the more important point here is I'm not sure it's about African brands. I mean, are there European brands? Are there global brands? Sure. But actually, there aren't that many when you peel it back. And even groups like Danone, I think, will have very specific local brands that they apply in different markets. I think for me, it's about the manufacturing cost. What can you do to bring the manufacturing cost down? And I think the bit that I would just add is when we look at the challenges we face in sourcing products, foreign currency stability and energy and fuel costs really stand out.
Okay.
And I think if that can be addressed in a lot of these markets, I think that will help bring the manufacturing costs down to then enable local production to be more competitive.
Brilliant. And Henry?
I think also when you look at demographics in Africa, right? We heard at the opening stage of the Generation Alpha, right? And what percent of the world population will be that? I think there's a unique opportunity, right, to catch the next generation and give them different brand than we grew up with, right? So, so I just want to bring that into the conversation as well, right? I think it's actually it's a unique opportunity for manufacturers to really catch a whole different generation, a big part of the population going forward. So.
Yeah. I like this for going down the line.
And
Vania can have the final word.
Yeah. I think the main issue is not about exporting raw material, or if you call about food area, because there is the hardware area and the raw material, which is more hardware, which is mining and so, and the agro product. I think there is, the issue is not about they export or we import the raw finished product. Today in Africa, when I was young, I was mainly milk, Nestle, Won't Take, or Gigos, there was those things. But today, it's a reality. When I was kid, so already printed on the mind. And then now, the information become more democratic. So it's reaching even the rural area. So with the local brand, showing them outside and be known, because it was not known. I think that what we need as industrial or agro-processing or in Africa, we need get more flexibility from the countries we are operating in order to everybody, not even the European company, to be able to come to set up the facility. I mean, for protein, I was looking for setting up a protein plant in Tanzania. Then I realized that to do that, I need more cold air, because if I bring here, it will cost more energy, because the fly need more cold, so they produce more heat. So I say, if I put in Tanzania, I need to cool down the plant to get the protein. So those I mean, there could be a complementary between the West and Africa, providing we are getting the basic to work easily in manufacturing. So there is a lot of challenges. We are not here to talk about that, but I'm saying what we are doing today, it's need time, need energy, and we should not have that. When I say I drove from Dar to Kigali, it's just to see how it is. So I could take the plane, but I will miss a lot of things. So I need to understand how it's moving. 3 years ago, I want to see how the villages have improved. How can I pricing now, how the country is changing, how Rwanda provinces are changing. So I need to be on the eyes and see it. So but if things was easy, we just have the management and put the system and things will work. We have everything. We say 1.5 billion, but it's 1.5 billion dispatch in different area. So there is a lot of opportunity in Africa for everybody. There is a consumer population. They like technology, especially for those brands, because we talk about FMCG, but those brands, the phone, look, everyone has American, Chinese, European phone. There is no African. Nobody is coming to produce that phone here. And they will spend $1,000, even he's living in a let's say, in a steel house, steel sheet house, he will buy the 1,000 tablet and show that he has a tablet. He won't buy the drinks at $1, but he will buy the 1,000. So there is a different approach, which brand, which product you're going to offer in your consumer.
And on that note, I think we have come to the end of our session. I just want to thank our panelists for a fruitful discussion. And I think, it was really interesting. Thank you very much. I think there's a lot to think about. We've talked about the opportunities, we've talked about some of the problems, but obviously the market is there. It's about tailoring the products and getting the price point right. So thank you very much. Thank you, Monia.